Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to NARC's webinar this afternoon. I'm Leslie Wallach, Executive Director, National Association of Regional Councils. We're thrilled to have you join us today, and please introduce today's program. Today's webinar will focus on efforts by the Northeast Ohio Area Coordinating Agency, or NOACA, to address racial equity in the 5-county area that includes the city of Cleveland. This begins a series of resources for you as you build equity into your planning and programs. Please share your stories with us so that we may include them and help your colleagues across the nation learn from your work. As most of us know, the Cleveland area has a storied history. It was once the home of John D. Rockefeller and a center for world-class art collections and one of the finest orchestras in the world, the Cleveland Orchestra. Despite its difficulties, Greater Cleveland is now home to more than 37% of Fortune 500 companies through corporate headquarters, major divisions, subsidies, and sales offices. 22 of all Fortune 1000 companies have their corporate headquarters in Greater Cleveland. In addition, more than 150 international companies have a presence there. Cleveland's recovery did not impact everyone in the same way, and a legacy of inequity has remained. A significant contributor to inequity in Greater Cleveland has been the planning process, which has favored some group over others. To address this lack of equity, NOACA made a commitment to racial equity in planning. Today, you will learn about the whys and hows, the actions and outcomes of NOACA and its commitment to racial equity in planning. We have 3 outstanding panelists, all from Greater Cleveland. They are the Honorable Annette Blackwell, Mayor, City of Maple Heights, Ohio, and Chair of the NOACA Board's Policy Committee. The Policy Committee, under the leadership of Mayor Blackwell, played a huge role in their efforts to develop and implement NOACA's commitment to racial equity in planning. The Honorable Matt Zone, Councilmember, City of Cleveland, and member NOACA Board of Directors, whose strong leadership in Cleveland around issues of equity was an important component of ensuring the success of NOACA's commitment to racial equity in planning. Matt is also the immediate Vice President of the National League of Cities. And finally, we welcome Grace Gallucci, Executive Director of NOACA, and a prime mover among the staff to put into action NOACA's commitment to racial equity in planning. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Grace, who will begin the webinar. Thank you, Grace. Thank you to our speakers.
Thank you very much, Leslie. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here today to talk about commitments to racial equity in planning. And I'm thrilled that you have identified NOACA as a leader in this regard. And we will be sharing with you today in 2 parts. Next slide, please. So the first part of the, I'm sorry, I think you're way ahead of me. Go to slide number 2. Yeah, let me, okay. So, whoops, no, give me a second here. All right, so the first part, I will go into the background and some of the work that we're doing around planning, engaging, and learning, and then give a couple examples of programs and policies. Next, and then part 2, we will be turning it over to the mayor and the councilman to talk about the statement development and applying an equity lens to the work that we are doing and will do and how that will move us forward. Next. Great. So when we talk about racial equity in planning, we are being consistent with NOACA's guiding mission and values, and we're committed to playing our part to eradicate racial inequities. That's the background behind this. We believe that building on an equitable future for the region within a framework that recognizes the ways that we can facilitate change by using our purview of transportation planning, thus connecting our neighborhoods, our communities, and our assets to enhance the quality of life for all, continues to be our focus. Next slide. I want to direct you to the statement that the American Planning Association put out, I believe, in June. And they talk very specifically about righting the wrongs of racial inequity and for the planning profession itself to take some responsibility for things that they have done intentionally or unintentionally to cause this inequity. And when we reflect on that at NOACA, we say that in our role as planners, particularly transportation and environmental planners, we can help bridge the divide between the advancement of programs, policies, investments that are inclusive and fair, and therefore benefit all people. And we have lots of things that we currently work on, like workforce mobility, transit-oriented development, transportation for livable communities, et cetera, that help us to focus on better addressing land use and general transportation access, air quality, and water quality. And we're looking for new initiatives to lay as a foundation to build a more equitable Northeast Ohio. Next. So to achieve equity, we must acknowledge the inequities that exist and those that persist. And it requires sometimes confronting very uncomfortable historical and present day factors that have contributed to these disparities. And it requires then active work to do so. I want to address the map in front of you. So the map in front of you is NOACA's original long-range transportation plan from 1969. That was its first one. The map on the left is the highway system. The map on the right is the transit system. And essentially in this plan, they both had a tremendous amount of investment and a schematic around that planning. And it was really thoughtful in how it expected the region to grow. So that was 1969. Let me give you a little bit of background too. In 1968, Cleveland elected the first African-American mayor of a major city. However, even though we believed that we were very much at the forefront of racial equity, in that same year, 1968, NOACA was formed. And the MPO was formed with 7 counties. Each of those 7 counties had an equal number of representatives, 6, on the board, even though Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland is located, housed the majority of the region's population. And worse yet, the city of Cleveland, which then had the majority of Cuyahoga County's population, had only 1 seat. I mean, is it any wonder then that the highways were built, which induced sprawl to the outer counties, and the transit system was not built out at all? So the map on the left came to fruition, the map on the right did not. So the question is, who benefited from the investment and who was hurt by the lack of investment? And those are the questions we have to talk about and look to remedy. Next. So we are looking to remedy these things through 3 very specific and dynamic ways. One is the planning process. We are currently developing a long-range plan that focuses on equity. It's ENEO 2050, an equitable future for Northeast Ohio, and focusing on the intersection of transportation with land use, housing, health impacts, and economic development. That's our way to achieve equity. Next. Second is informing and engaging. So we want to talk to the public, inform them, and listen to them. Tell the stories, acknowledge the history, invite the participation, but more importantly, be vigilant about the engaging traditionally marginalized communities. So we're really putting a lot of emphasis on ourselves for that. I will admit that NOACA has not been the strongest organization in the engagement of environmental justice communities. That is an area that we have been really trying to work hard on with the development and implementation of a public interaction plan. Next. Also, what's been critical for us is learning and applying those lessons to our work, and that means educating staff. Over the last 18 months or 2 years or so, we've been focused on racial equity and the kinds of things that we have done. We participated in and are still participating in training around racial equity and inclusion through the REI Institute. We participated as an organization in an interactive exhibit on Design the Red Line, and we attended a play at the Karamu House Theater as a team called Rashida Speaking. These are all creative ways and some traditional ways to really better understand the impacts of racial inequity. If our planners don't understand what that looks like, what it means, and how we got to where we got to, we're not going to be able to fix it. So that's a critical part of our process. So more about planning. I mentioned some diversity and inclusion policies that we've put together, including the public interaction plan. There are a number of them. Some of them you are all very familiar with, Title VI, DBE, etc. But I want to draw your attention, next slide, to 3 very specific policies that we created ourselves over the last couple of years. The Environmental Justice Policy, Urban Core Communities Policy, and the Disadvantaged Communities Policy, which both defines what they are as well as provides benefits to those communities. Next slide. Very specifically to the Urban Core Communities Policy, we're thinking about this in the way of intentionality. We want to particularly highlight the communities that have been the major focus of some of this disinvestment, and some of the disinvestment was intentional, some of it was not. It was simply a result of sprawl, which in and of itself we can debate whether sprawl is good or bad, but nevertheless the consequences are here. And as you can see in front of you, the criteria is very explicit, and we keep moving on and saying these urban core communities have both a physical infrastructure aspect to them as well as a community aspect. Next slide, please. When we get to the next level, which is disadvantaged communities, you first must be a urban core community to become a disadvantaged community in terms of our policy and the benefits. So now there's further criteria that focuses on the people or the community aspect of it, not as much on the infrastructure. Next slide. We then parlay that into the environmental justice policy, which very much takes the federal definition and breaks it down further in terms of application for our programs and policies. Next slide. To give you an example of a policy that has allowed us to give preferential treatment to environmental justice communities as well as disadvantaged and urban core is our toll credits policy. So we in Ohio have a tollway, and that tollway collects tolls. It is also used as part of and is considered part of the federal interstate system, so it is I-90. So we do get credit for the maintenance of that federal lookalike highway system, and we're able to use those as match against our projects. So what we've done is create a policy that states if you are an environmental justice community, you can waive local match entirely, the entire 20%, and therefore you can access more of our programs, more of our funds, and we will work with you to do that. That was something that was very intentional and did have a very negative impact prior to implementing this policy, because there were communities that on paper had an opportunity to access our funds, but in reality did not, because they didn't have the wherewithal for providing that local match. Next. So to give you an idea of what our environmental justice communities look like, and actually we call these areas and not communities because they don't adhere to the borders of communities. We've broken them down into the TAS level, so they are throughout the region, and some are both minority and poverty, some are minority, some are poverty. Next slide. So we've taken the work that we have done and we have applied the idea of environmental justice, disadvantaged community, and urban core community into our TIP evaluation process. And so when we are evaluating, prioritizing TIP projects, in addition to the normal purpose and need statement evaluation, the cost effectiveness, regional significance criteria, we also, because we're both rural and urbanized, look at the divide between urban and rural, but then we also look at the diversity and inclusion policies and overlay that on the maps to see how we best want to support those communities. Next slide. And to show you what our tip currently looks like, I'm sorry, next slide. I think I'm behind one. So basically, this is our tip. So we have taken all the things that I just said and overlay it. And as you can see, we are very much in support of the environmental justice communities by sponsoring and investing in projects in those areas. We develop the plans for those projects and we validate them with the communities. We don't have the communities develop the plans first and then evaluate them. So that's an important point in the juncture. So that's kind of an example of what we're doing at NOACA. Next, I'd like to turn it over to the mayor and the councilman to talk about their passion in racial equality and social equity. Why is it important to them? And why and how they developed the board statement. I will turn it over to Mayor Annette Blackwell, who is our chair of the policy committee. And she shepherded much of the development of the statement along with several of our other chairs of committees. Mayor Blackwell?
Thank you, Grace. I appreciate being here today, and thank you all for joining us today. You know, when the idea of a board statement, to put this in writing and to really live and work by it, the things that really moved me, and I think those that were so impassioned to put this together, there's a lot of dialogue, a lot of emotion. It was the cruelty of racism. In the death of George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor showed up on the TV screens in our living rooms and our kitchens. That horror really took the breath away of a lot of people. It's similar to the march to Montgomery on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, when those images of those protesters and marchers hit the screen of Life magazine. It brought about a reality of the horror of what racism is. And so when that showed up on the TV screens and living rooms and in kitchens, that began the work. I think we all knew when we came back and assembled, we were going to have to make a statement about where we stood as NOACA board members. Certainly COVID-19, in the middle of all that, the COVID-19 pandemic, it glaringly revealed the racial disparity that is in our healthcare system. And certainly with the work that we do, that Grace Gallucci has so eloquently and very clearly laid out for the people joining us today, it's clear that gentrification, whether it's in highway construction or neighborhoods, is replacing residents in older neighborhoods and making housing extremely unaffordable. And so I will conclude my portion with saying racial injustice is on the agenda of our young people right now, and civil unrest is in our streets. And that calls for action, which is demonstrated in the statement that we put together for just really frame our work at NOACA.
And Mayor, I do have the statement listed in the next 4 slides. We have it in 4 parts. We're not going to go through that, but certainly the participants can access that after the webinar. You can also access it on our website.
Let me speak to that real quickly before my colleague, Councilman Zone, who agreed to just kind of help me do this today. There's a couple things in the statement that really moved me. And when we get in the first paragraph, and the second sentence is, the NOACA Board of Directors is aware of the consequences of historic racism and its legacy. And this is the part that gets me, that has resulted in systemic racism, which is defined as a form of racism, intentional or unintentional, because a lot of people will say that was before, it had nothing to do with me. The other part of that we ended that particular paragraph was that we unequivocally condemn racism, injustice, and inequality. And then you go to the second paragraph, last sentence, that says, we will continue to embrace diversity, strive for equity, and seek inclusion in all of our efforts. And we will ensure that these actions remain explicit values that are always reflected as a core component of our work. Those particular ones are the ones that I hang on to. And that is really, I think, sums up a good work that so many people did and really putting this particular statement together. Thank you so much.
Councilman Zone?
Sure. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Mayor Blackwell. And to the NARC representatives on the call. It's great to be with all of you. I had the opportunity, I think 2 years ago or 3, we were in the city of Cleveland for a summer board meeting and had the opportunity to address you as the president of the National League of Cities. My time within that organization has really influenced a lot of the policy work that I've done here locally, learning from national experts about what they were doing. So I applaud all of you jumping on this call to hear a little bit about the work we're doing in the city of Cleveland. So Grace, Director Gallucci, you asked the question of the mayor and me, why? Why now? And the best public policy I've ever led has really emanated in is really an outgrowth of the constituency I represent. I represent a majority minority district, and I've seen the pain based on poor planning that has happened for decades in our community, although we're getting it right and we're doing it really well today. But we have a lot of work to do to make up to that, for that. But just hearing the pain, talking with the community, knowing around the level of stress that is dominating many people, particularly now in the midst of a global pandemic, and a lot of just the social ills that plague our society, there is a distinct role for government to kind of right the wrongs. And if we don't, shame on us for not doing it. And particularly for a person like me, I don't know if my image is up on the screen, I'm a white male. And you need more white people in this space, openly, confidently, with confidence, speaking about these issues. For too long, we have swept this under the rug. You know, Grace mentioned that NOACA was founded in 1968. That was also just coincided with the city of Cleveland. Not only we had now the first African-American mayor of a major city, and our population, we were the powerhouse in the county seat with nearly 1 million people, and the county was about 1.4. Well, today our region is about, our county, just the one county, not the NOACA service area, is about 1.3 million, and the city population is 400,000. So we sprawled out. These roads that we built, the inequities in transportation planning has allowed communities to really depopulate and leave Center City. So in my, I've been on the NOACA board for about 2.5 years now, and I remember having a conversation last fall, or a conversation coming up at the committee level where somebody was talking about a new potential intersection. And I think I shocked my colleagues on the board, and I said, look, we're not going to talk about any new intersections unless this board is prepared to talk about race. If you want to talk about race, and if you want to talk about poor public planning and what we have done to really segregate our communities, then I'm willing to have any conversation that you want to have around this issue. As Mayor Blackwell said, I mean, what really motivated our board to move in this direction, we got locked down in March. We were in this pandemic, and we were on a board meeting, I think, in April. And the concept came up where people were seeing city governments, certain mayors, elected officials, making declarative statements on how they felt about what was happening in our community. And so I just suggested to the board, I think we need to put out a bold statement around racism in our society and how it affects the planning system. And to Grace, Director Gallucci's credit, she led nearly 50 people on Zoom virtual meetings over the course of 3 different sessions. I mean, we probably invested over a dozen hours in this to actually come up where we all felt comfortable. Now, I will tell you, there's a high percentage of the board that looks like me. And having the voice of Director Gallucci and Mayor Blackwell and others who really contributed to the wordsmithing of that document really showed value. So now as board members and trustees, we're going to live by these values. We're going to hold our organization accountable to these values. And I think that anyone who serves in a public role should enter into this space and really make constituency wants to know, what is my government stand? And so I'm really proud to be a part of this organization.
Mayor Blackwell, Councilman Zone told us a little bit about his constituency and jurisdiction. And just to give folks an idea of our NOACA region, the NOACA region is more than 25% minority. So 1 in 4 people are minorities. Tell us a little bit about the community that you serve and how you think racial inequity, particularly around transportation or caused by transportation, affects the people.
You know, racial equality and social equity is extremely important to you because I have personally experienced structural racism as a Black woman whose family migrated to the North in the 60s from the Jim Crow South. I happen to be the mayor and safety director of a majority Black city. More than 71% of the residents in the city of Maple Heights are Black. The poverty rate is almost 20% in the city of Maple Heights. And the city that I lead is in fiscal emergency. And it was declared in 2014, so we're going 5 years now being in this fiscal declaration state. And it was declared with almost a $3 million deficit. And so what that means is I'm unable to hire enough safety officers to keep our city safe. I can't replace old, outdated police vehicles and emergency squads. I'm unable to recruit key personnel, more specifically enforcement officers, to help and enforce our housing codes, to then maintain the city's real estate. And that's important because we're a bedroom community. We're densely populated with houses on 40 by 120 foot lots. And when you get to the west side of Maple, a little bit wider, 65 by 140. I've got over 10,000 housing units, commercial and residential. So everything's real close. You can reach out and touch your neighbors. And so it's extremely important to me in this city because of the city and the people that I lead. It's important to inspire them. It's important to impact a quality of life and deliver that quality of life. That is my challenge every day. I can do that when we're on an equal playing field. It's much more difficult when the playing field is different and people are disproportionately affected in so many areas of their life.
What about, and I've heard you talk about this, Mayor Blackwell, the folks in your community and how challenging it might be to access jobs, because you are a suburban community. And when you're talking about public transit or some other type of transportation outside of the single occupancy vehicle, it's a challenge for your folks to get to jobs.
Yes, with having an almost 20% poverty rate, the median income is about less than $40,000, about $37,000. In most of over a third of my households are single female-headed households. They can't afford a car to maintain the car, the insurance, the repairs, because they certainly can't buy a brand new car. So they rely heavily on public transportation. Every major corner in the city has a bus stop. And so they're trying to get to jobs, and most of them work in the healthcare field. They're medical assistants, they work in skilled nursing, they're the support staff, ancillary staff. And so their day begins at 4 o'clock in the morning. These are moms, they have 2, 3 kids. So normally the first transfer stop is getting the child to daycare. And again, it's pitch black and it's 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. They have to be at work at 7 or 8 o'clock. And so it's a 2-hour commute. They get the child to the daycare, that's the first stop. And the second step is to go back to a place where they can access public transportation. And with so many jobs moving to the exurbs, it's difficult. For many of them, I've heard it's a 90-minute drive. That's where they can catch a little bit of sleep, and usually they have a relationship with the driver to kind of wake them when they get there. And they never get them to the doors of the employer on these jobs that are further out. They get them to a central location in some of these exurbs. So they have to then walk that last mile in inclement weather. It's freezing cold or it's pouring down rain to get there. There's a lot of turnover and frustration because 6 or 9 months of that, because there's another 90-minute ride home, stop to pick up the baby and get home. Day starts at 4 o'clock, they're getting home at 7 o'clock, checking homework, making dinner, get ready to go to bed and do it all over again. So these companies have a great deal of turnover. great challenges retaining these. They can recruit them because they need the jobs, retaining these residents, and they get frustrated, and so they're quitting. And so they're always trying to find a job a little bit closer to cut the commute so they can help Susie or Jimmy with their homework and just have some more time at home. So it is a real challenge. I can't imagine going, 3 hours back and forth to work and dropping a little one off and then go do an 8-hour shift, sometimes standing on my feet at a machine where I'm standing more. It's a very, very difficult journey. It's a hard-earned living. But I can tell you, these women and men, because they're men now who are the head of the household, I've met several of them, are doing it. And they're doing it with some challenges I think could easily be resolved with the right planning.
Councilman Zone, part of the development of the equity statement included the creation of a subcommittee of the policy committee to focus on equity and applying an equity lens to the work that we do. That was your suggestion. Tell us a little bit about what made you think of that and how you see it advancing forward.
One of the things I appreciate most about serving on the NOACA board is how transparent the organization is. There are a number of committees and councils and advisory councils that are advisory in nature and really alerts us to key timely issues and allow for good, thoughtful public discourse. Too often when governments are making decisions, they're made in silos and they're not engaging communities. And I thought that if we could create a little working group, a subcommittee focusing on equity, we developed a solid policy. Well, now how can we make sure that it is permeated through all the councils, all the committees, all of the work that the NOACA board puts forward. Ultimately, at the end of the day, our board has to make the final decision, but knowing that staff has received extensive training, that the thoughtful, methodical, transparent committee and council process is going to embed the work of what we do through an equity lens. And I'll just relate to a thing that just made me smile that our organization's done. We have a large Amish community. We did a complete street for the Amish. We put in a really cool road. They never had sidewalks, and we put in sidewalks, and we put in a buggy trail. I mean, that is equity. And when you can change the conditions and make it good for people who live there and improve their quality of life, then we're succeeding. So this committee will lead that effort, look at the work of all of our councils and our committees and how we embed that and make that permanent.
Great. When we think about the role of transportation policy, and I talked about a lot of the policies around urban core communities and disadvantaged communities, EJ, how do you see the work of NOACA now? Let me say, I had a hard time when you all were developing the statement. One of the hardest things for me to do was to step back and say, I know we've done some things, but we really haven't done enough. I was proud of my board. I was proud of my staff. I was proud of the work that NOACA has done. The equity isn't just something we started since the George Floyd protests. We've been working on this for years, so I was proud of that and I wanted to talk about it. And the board members gently pushed back to say, none of that matters. At this point, what we're talking about is where we are in terms of the inequity and what we're going to be doing about it. It's yes, you've done some things, but it hasn't done everything that we need to do. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on that, knowing that you've been part of that hard work too, but what do you see ahead? Where do you see the path forward going?
I often will tell people that where we build our roads often dictates where our housing is or where our future housing will be. Where the housing is ultimately we need to provide that infrastructure, but it all has an environmental impact, getting to the EJ issues Director Gallucci you've been talking about. Our city suffered tremendously in the 30s and 40s, and our whole region did, quite honestly, with a lot of the redlining that was done in our community. These these racially restrictive deeds and covenants were two of the most effective, although very negatively effective, impactful tools for housing discrimination. And then after World War II, when the GIs came home, they wanted that big acre lot, that suburban station wagon, and they wanted to move out to the country. What happened was, concurrently, in the 60s, there was some civil unrest. The city of Cleveland started to depopulate. There was a lot of unrest. And so now planners and organizations like our MPO, NOACA, has to go in and make sure we can right some of these wrongs that were done years and generations ago. And it's just not redlining for people getting a loan and housing discrimination. Look at our urban tree canopies all across America. In the communities that were typically redlined, they have less coverage of trees. The average heat in the summertime is 15, maybe 20 degrees higher than those whiter communities that were getting loans because they filled them up with tree canopies. And then that toxic stress that comes with it. I mean, Mayor Blackwell did such a beautiful job of illustrating the struggles of a single mom trying to raise a child. Can you imagine waking up at 4 a.m. in the morning, the stress that you have to endure, and then take multiple buses to get your child to daycare and then to work, and then to walk that last mile? It's real. And so we have an opportunity, maybe Mayor Blackwell, you might want to add something to the statement, as elected leaders, as planners, as MPOs, to right these wrongs. Mayor?
Sure. I want to demonstrate, Councilman Zone, and Grace, you and I have had this conversation, what it looks like. What's racial inequity? What happens in communities when redlining takes place? Well, I want to tell you, it creates isolation. And it leaves a city to be perceived as being undesirable, unsafe. Therefore, it creates a non-progressive and an unsuccessful assimilation when we all look the same. There's really not an agenda for diversity and inclusion. I was benefited because I was able to work in corporate America prior to being a mayor, and so I've worked with all kinds of people. But I was at a school board meeting, and a young man had a major football game, and they were celebrating him. They said, "What do you really want to do?" And he said, "I want to go to the zoo." And I'm looking at this kid that's probably 6 feet, beautiful red shoes, red jacket, very handsome, 17, and he said he wanted to go to the zoo. The zoo is literally less than 20 minutes from Maple Heights. But that isolation and really a non-progressive life, just grinding to make it. And that's an unsuccessful assimilation. Home value appreciation in cities like Maple Heights, when just the equity is taken and environmental justice is not achieved, it's not on par with the predominantly white communities, which affects closing the wealth gap and creating generational wealth. It keeps us poorer. The house I live in Maple Heights, is the same example of a couple houses in Orange, same developer, but it's $100,000 less in value. Same developer, same style, cedar siding, the skylight thing, because it sits in Maple Heights. So the home evaluation is not on par, but makes it more difficult for us to create generational wealth or take that second mortgage to send our child to school or a wedding. And additionally, low home values often attract wealthy home investors. That's who comes in, because they can pick up a 3-bedroom bungalow, 1,200 square feet, finished basement, a detached garage, nice driveway, a pretty nice house for less than $40,000, $50,000. So that's who comes in, and they buy them, and then they charge $1,200, $1,500 a month. And so then it strips the Black community of the wealth, the financial, and the family security. Because once they pay the rent on the first, on the second, they're already worried about how they're going to pay the rent the next month on the first. So the property home ownership in cities like Maple Heights, because of redlining and all the things that we're talking about, it makes affordable rental housing scarce. And people calling me all the time saying, is there any, I want to live in Maple Heights, is there anything less than $1,000? And the answer is no, it isn't. Although they may have got the home for you know, $50,000, they're pulling in this high rent. But that's what happens with it. But I don't think you realize the isolation. And when you have the white flight, they take the wealth out of the community. And so now you've got a less than $40,000 median income because the wealth is out of the community. So now so the city sends fiscal emergency. The school doesn't have the funding. So that's the picture that I wanted to draw to what my colleague Councilman Zone talked about. That's what happens when those things take place and we don't do the work we're doing.
I know we're getting close to the 15 minutes for questions and answers. I will leave the two of you with the last statements on the statement.
Well, I'm again humbled by serving on a board that puts their values in writing, makes it transparent on our website so people know where we stand, and so then people that can hold us accountable, that it's printed on a paper, that it's just not words printed on a paper, that we live by this creed, and so for that I'm thankful. There anything you want to add?
Sure. You know, this transportation and creating and sustaining equity is so important because you know what it does? It ensures a better quality of life. It really does. When access is available for personal and social reasons, it takes away the isolation. It supports diversity and inclusion and tolerance and exposure. It's so important. So I don't have a 17-year-old kid that's never been to the zoo, not realizing it's only less than 20 minutes away. When service is frequent and affordable for riders who can't afford personal cars, it affords them transportation to get to work, to put food on the table, to put clothes on the table, and even maybe go to the zoo. Daycare is accessible, maybe a higher quality daycare, and helps them get to school if they want to pursue an advanced degree. I was an adult when I went back to get my degree, but it enables them to get to school too, to pursue maybe that degree they've always wanted, GED or skilled trade, to get to their healthcare provider. I can't tell how many people have tried to use my ambulance to get to the doctor. That's not what the ambulance is for, but many of them use it to get to the doctor for primary care or emergency services. And then it helps them get to family. So if I move and I move up, and you talked about the loss of population, I move up and I move to Maple Heights, so things are just a little bit better, and my lot's a little bit bigger, the house is a little bit nicer, maybe there's central air and a back and a front yard for my kids to play, and a place for me to park my car. Now I'm far away from family. How do I continue to stay in touch with family, to keep tradition and support that's important to families and that quality of life?
Thank you so much. We've just really, really appreciate it. It was an incredible discussion. You've done incredible work there at NOACA, and we just really, really appreciate you sharing what you've done with us. So I thank you very much. I don't think we're getting close to the end of the time. If there are questions that you'd like to send in to us, and we will get them submitted to our speakers today. This session is recorded, so we thank you, Mayor Blackwell, Councilmember Zone, and Grace for sharing this with us. This is the first in our series. We have a couple of other webinars that we encourage you to join us for. We also ultimately are putting together resources for our members, including all the work that you have done, so that our members can learn from you and have colleagues and peers to go back to. So we appreciate you being first, letting us know and sharing all these stories for us. With that, if you want additional information or future information on future webinars, or to discuss the interest in sharing your stories with your colleagues across the nation and regions, please send that information to Neil at narc.org. We are going to be putting together further webinars, blogs, and best practices guides. So we're very anxious to hear from all of the rest of you on what you are doing. I want to thank you. Please stay healthy, everyone. And we look forward to hearing more for the great work of NOACA. Thanks so much. We will talk to everybody soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.